السلام عليكم جميعا، نرحب بكم في الورشة الإلكترونية اللي تنظمها وحدة التعليم المستمر في كلية الصيدلة بالتعاون مع شعبة ضمان الجودة وتقييم الأداء ووحدة الإنسانية للتعليم الإلكتروني. ضيفنا لهذا اليوم أستاذ بروفيسور دكتور ناصر الشريف. Welcome دكتور ناصر. Our workshop today is Quality Assurance in Education. Our guest, Professor Nasser, received his PhD from Creighton University Medical Center in Pharmacology Toxicology in 1992. His MS degree in Pharmaceutical Sciences from the University of Nebraska Medical Center, 1988, and a PharmD from the University of Nebraska Medical Center in 1987 in Omaha, Nebraska. He served as the Associate Director of the Distance Pharmacy Pathway from 2001 to 2006, and as the Coordinator for International Relations of the Middle East and India. Since 1995, he coordinated exchange visits by students and faculty from China, Egypt, England, Jordan, Sweden, and South Korea, and finalized a number of memorandum of understanding. Dr. Al-Sharif was acknowledged by his students in winning Outstanding Teacher Awards and by his colleagues in the School of Pharmacy and Health Professions by winning Scholarly Teaching and Service Awards. He was the recipient of the Creighton University John P. Scalzo Diversity Award for Excellence in Innovation in 2013 and the Distinguished Educator in Teaching as a Scholarship in 2014. He was the recipient of the
You just froze.
And he is well published in the areas of toxicology, of polyaromatic hydrocarbons, distance education, scholarship of teaching and learning, and teaching medicinal chemistry and clinical toxicology, and in the use of technology. Healthcare disparities and cultural competency, health and healing practices of people of faith, provider bias in global pharmacy education. He is a certified immunizer and an immunization trainer. He practiced as an on-call and part-time pharmacist for more than 20 years at 5 local hospitals and precepted hundreds of students. Dr. Al-Sharif has been a member of the International Pharmaceutical Federation since 2015 and the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy, AACP, since 1995. He is the winner of the AACP Innovation in Teaching Award competition in 2000 and 2006 and received an honorable mention for the same award in 2002 and 2004. In 2016, he received the inaugural Distinguished Teaching Scholar Award from the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy. In 2018, he received the inaugural Outstanding Service Award from the AACP Global Pharmacy Education, a special interest group, and in 2020 from the Health Disparities and Cultural Competency Special Interest Group. Dr. Al-Sharif served as a member of an evaluation team for the Accreditation Council for Pharmacy Education, International Services. He also served as a visiting professor, consultant, coordinator for strategic planning, and an external assessor at several universities in the Arab world, including Egypt, Jordan, Oman, Palestine, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Dr. Al-Sharif was also invited as a plenary speaker and presenter at several local, national, and international conferences. In Feb 2022, he fulfilled his dream to come back to the Arab world and serve as a full-time basis. He accepted a position of dean at the Lebanese American University, the only ACPE accredited school outside the USA. The last 7 months has been one of the most uplifting experiences in his career. Dr. Al-Sharif was very active in Omaha community, in interfaith dialogue, and in educating the public, politicians, academia, business, and faith groups about Arabs, Arab Muslims, Arab Christians, Arab Americans, Islam, Palestine, and the rights of Palestinian people. He is also a football coach with D license and a state high school and college football referee. Dr. Nassar, we are very pleased to have you with us today. Thank you for accepting the invitation, and we are really excited to learn from you about your experience with quality assurance in education and all the accreditations in pharmacy education. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Kauthar, and thank you for the kind introduction. I did not expect you to read everything from the CV, so I appreciate your kind introduction. مساء الخير للجميع، يعطيكم العافية، شكرا كثير على الانفيتيشن، واعذروني انه حكي بالانجليزي للمحاضرة, so I hope that will be okay. And always such a pleasure to be with the colleagues in Iraq. Iraq is very dear to me. We used to spend our vacations on the way to Lebanon and Egypt. We lived in Kuwait for quite a while before I moved to England and then the United States. Certainly Iraq is the cradle of civilization. It's the center for the universe, as many people identified it, the land of Hammurabi Code, where writing was first discovered, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. God willing, I'll come back and visit that. And certainly the golden era for the Arab Islamic civilization, and God willing, that will return. So again, very dear to my heart. One of my dear mentors is Dr. Zuhair Muhyiddin, who was a professor at the University of Baghdad in the 1970s and 80s, and I'm sure many of you might know him. He was with us in the United States when I was finishing my PhD, and I stayed in touch with him. So such a pleasure again to be with all of you. Today's presentation, the title, I kind of changed it a little bit, Quality Assurance in Higher Education, since we are in higher education, but that applies certainly for education in general, absolutely. So my outline, we're going to have an introduction, and it's actually a long introduction, which is kind of different because I wanted to set the stage with the introduction. Hopefully some of that is helpful, informative. Some of it might be really very well known to you, but I felt it's really critical to go through that. And then we're going to talk about why quality assurance in higher education and how to establish a culture of continuous quality assurance. So it's not enough to have quality, it has to be continuous, it has to be systemic. So we'll talk about that. And I think the key thing with really establishing a culture is having all the stakeholders involved in this culture of quality as part of a systemic process, being done all the time and so on. And another key thing we'll talk about is it's not enough to establish it, we need to maintain it. Many people sadly establish a beautiful assessment for their program on a curricular level, a programmatic level. Unfortunately, as the semester goes by, the year goes by, everybody gets so busy and so on, and they really forget to maintain that culture and keep up with it and so on. So very critical. The last thing, and I hope you will help me with that, I'll do a summary, but before it, hopefully you can tell me based on the presentation, and if I did a good job, to kind of maybe help me with what do you think the implications for you at the University of Baghdad. So with that kind of setup, let's go on with the introduction. The first word, and we're going to go through some definitions, and I think that's important. And again, many of you are familiar with these, but I think it's important to go through those. So when we talk about accreditation, I'm glad to hear that you started this process, and in Iraq now, you have a National Council for Accreditation of Pharmacy Colleges. That is the ultimate thing that we all seek in terms of establishing quality in our programs, which is to get accreditation. It is fantastic that you have an internal accrediting body now. Many countries and so on try to look at external accreditation, which can be important in some cases, absolutely. But to have an internal process is really critical. I did go online to find the document. I could not really find it. I did find the one that is related to the medical school, and we'll touch base on that later. But again, That is the ultimate thing that we're trying to seek with this process of quality. You cannot do that without assessment. And when we talk about assessment, I'm sure you identify, that we have formative assessment, and a formative assessment in an evaluation of student comprehension and needs that occurs as part of the learning process. Another definition is evaluation designated to improve the learning process as opposed to assessing the learning outcomes. Very important to distinguish that from the summative evaluation. Examples of formative could be doing a pre-assessment in your classroom. It could be a faculty member who uses the Socratic method and challenges the students to answer questions and so on. It could be doing self-assessment. It could be peer review. It could be low-stake kind of test quizzes and so on. All of those it could be a focus group with your class and so on. All of these can be considered formative assessment. The one that most people are comfortable with, of course, is the summative. And that's where we evaluate student learning and their skills and how did they really acquire the skills that we want and so on. And that's where we have, of course, exams. It could be capstone exams. It could be exams within a course. It could be certain assessment. It could be OSCEs. Again, all of these can be considered summative assessment. And both of these are critical, both for the curricular assessment, but also for the programmatic assessment. And we'll talk about that. Again, we cannot really talk about accreditation if we don't have a continuous quality assurance improvement. So this assessment process, both formative and summative, is happening systemically all the time, not at just one point in time during the semester or during the year. It is systemic. So the continuous quality assurance improvement to close the loop on all the assessment processes that are happening in the school need to happen, and it's so critical for it to, again, to happen throughout the school year. Very, very important. Another key thing to remember, again, that's the process of assessing, planning, and then improving and continuing the process throughout the year. Curricular assessment, again, that is when we're trying to gather and analyze information from multiple sources. Key ones, of course, will be the courses that we are teaching and trying to assess if the courses are addressing the learning objectives and the learning outcomes for the program. That is going to be very critical. And other people, of course, and can have surveys, exit surveys for their graduates. For us in the United States and here, because we're an American university, we have to do also the AACP, the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy, exit survey for our students. We have to do it for our preceptors. So all of these processes in terms of assessment lend themselves to ultimately try to assess our curriculum. Very important, very critical. Disruptive innovation. I'm not sure how many of you heard that term, but it's a term that was coined in business by a professor at Harvard. But I love it because really for us in academia, we cannot just do business as usual. We always have to be thinking out of the box. We always have to be disruptive. Yes, there are certain things that we need to maintain and keep because they stay the course no matter what. However, in pharmacy and other kind of professions, things are changing all the time. So we need people to be really thinking out of the box, to be disruptive, thinking in terms of different ways to do things, pedagogies, instructional methodologies, and new ways of delivering the curriculum and so on. So the more we have people thinking in that way, this process will become innovative, creative, rather than stagnant or traditional in some sense, where we're not really kind of thinking, again, out of the box. So please keep that in mind, that yes, you could have a beautiful assessment process going, but ultimately you need to be thinking out of it. What else should I be doing? What are new kind of practice models? How do I bring that into the curriculum? How do I bring new courses and so on? Since I came, we tried to establish new opportunities for our students in Lebanon. So we introduced a 15, for example, credit hour in veterinary pharmacy. We have 2 hospitals, pharmacy. So now our curriculum has to embed these in terms of helping the students to learn about this important practice as pharmacists and so on, and new job opportunities, God willing, for them in Lebanon and maybe in other places. So again, very important in terms of this concept of disruptive innovation. When we talk about programmatic assessment, this is evaluation of the whole program, the way in which our program, our respective programs and so on, all the aspects of the program come together to meet the mission and the educational outcomes. We all, as pharmacy schools, have a mission. Our universities have a mission. We have a vision. Our program have to be aligned in terms of the university. And ultimately, we need to make sure that our program meet that mission, meet that vision for our school, and absolutely need the educational outcomes that we set out for our students to meet by the time they graduate. So that's the kind of big picture as compared to the curriculum. Many people think about assessment that it's only curricular assessment. Absolutely not. It is both the curricular and the programmatic, looking at maybe the 40,000 kind of feet view to make sure we're looking at the holistic program in terms of are we accomplishing what we want to accomplish. The standards, the accreditation process is about standards. What are standards? It is the knowledge, the competencies, the skills, and yes, the attitudes that we measure up to, that we want to attain. And that is based on experts in pharmacy, experts in medicine, occupational therapy, whatever the health science program, these standards are set so that when we talk about accreditation, if a program meets those standards in the way they conduct business, if you want to put it that way, then absolutely that program will be accredited because they're meeting these standards. So critical, so important from that perspective that any accrediting body will establish standards. If we want to be accredited by that entity, that accrediting entity, then we need to make sure we meet those standards. Our learning outcomes that we establish within our schools have to be tied to these standards. And by the time we accomplish them with all the courses, the co-curricular activities we do, then ultimately we meet those standards, and God willing, ultimately we get accredited. So kind of hopefully this sets the stage moving forward. I don't have the chat, but any comments, any questions just based on this introduction? And I don't mind making this interactive. We don't have to wait, if somebody has a comment or question, absolutely. So please write it in the chat. And Dr. Kauthar, if you're keeping track of the chat, please let me know if I need to address something.
Sure, I'm keeping track of it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Just real quick to think in terms of the curricular assessment, very important because there's so many definitions, but I think I highlighted the key words. So when we talk about curricular assessment in terms of what we are trying to accomplish, the key thing is think about the definition. So assessment involves the use of empirical data. Empirical data is data that we collect based on systemic experimentation, observation, experience that we have with the curriculum. And based on that, then we refine our program. And the ultimate thing we want to do is improve student learning. All of these definitions, ultimately, the goal is to improve subsequent learning, increase students' learning and development. So the key thing is how you do it. And some of these definitions talks about using multiple and diverse sources in order to develop a deep understanding. And I love that word, a deep understanding. There's a lot of reflection that happens with that. So qualitative data, collecting qualitative data is critical, not only quantitative data. Qualitative is as important, so that we understand what students know, understand, and can do with their knowledge as a result of their educational experience. And ultimately, again, the process should culminate with assessment that will help to improve subsequent learning. If you read through the other definitions, it's the same process. Sometimes, again, you use different words. Inference is, again, we make conclusions based on what we collect and the data we collect and how we analyze it and interpret it. So please feel free to look at this and establish your own way of looking at assessment. You could use combination of the different words, or if one word or one definition, excuse me, feels this is really capture what we're trying to do, absolutely. But the key thing is it is a process, it is systemic, and so on. So again, the more you're comfortable with these terms, the more all the faculty are comfortable with the assessment terms, then everybody will be on the same page. And as the process goes forward, everybody recognizes what we're trying to do, or what the University of Baghdad School of Pharmacy is trying to do with their curriculum. Very, very important. So moving on, again, we're talking about quality assurance. We're talking about quality assurance in higher education. Interesting enough, in high schools, at least with all due respect, in the United States, the whole idea of quality assurance, they've always done that. It seems in higher education, it became really more of an issue in the 1980s. Part of that is the globalization that happened. Part of it that is the marketing that happened with many American universities and trying to bring students from abroad and so on, and even have campuses in different parts of the world and so on. So that really necessitated to look at the quality of the education that is being delivered vis-a-vis in the United States or in other parts of the world, and especially in the Arab world, as you know, in the Gulf and other places, certainly, and even for us as the Lebanese American University, many of our schools are accredited by American entities, including my school, the pharmacy school, so very, very important. I don't have to really mention the next bullet, as you know, whether it's in Iraq, the Arab world, not as much here in Lebanon, many private universities. And again, then quality assurance became very critical, very essential, very critical. Another major thing, more and more the public started questioning the value of higher education. So the need, again, to establish quality became very critical, very important. And that, again, necessitated to look at accreditation and quality assurance and the assessment and all of that. Now, the two other words, we already mentioned accreditation. You might have heard also about certification. In many ways, sometimes these are used interchangeably, but most of the time when we talk about certification, we're talking about certifying an individual that they have adequate credentials to practice as a pharmacist, as an occupational therapist, as a physician, and so on. But every now and then, yes, it is used as a confirmation by a third party that what we claim we are doing in our curriculum, in our program, actually is true. However, really, most people think in terms of standards and quality and so on, in terms of accreditation. And this is confirming by a third entity, basically, that there is a stamp of approval, if you want to put it that way, that your institution meets the standards that the experts have put forward in that particular profession, whether it's pharmacy or any other profession. So that your program meets that standards. And that is where, again, you're ensuring quality in your program to meet these standards, to ultimately the accrediting body whether it's in Iraq as an internal one or external, based on the standards that they establish, you will be accredited. Interesting enough, in most countries, the governments used to do this, the Ministry of Education, but more and more now we're seeing independent domestic agencies that are doing it, or independent international agencies. You're all familiar with the ACPE, which is the accrediting body for pharmacy schools in the United States. As you know, they started with this international certifications. I'm not sure how many schools in Iraq are certified by ACPE, but as they move forward with this, with many schools, especially in the Arab world, in Africa and Far East, and even in other parts of the world, there was more and more pressure to use international accreditation. So ACPE has changed their international service to international accreditation. So very, very important. And of course, professional bodies can do that, but a lot of the professional bodies will actually do certification because they're certifying individuals, like board certification in pharmacotherapy or nuclear pharmacy and so on. So it's more like certification. So again, to re-emphasize, accreditation, it's an institutional self-evaluation, it's systemic, it should be happening all the time, and that happens ultimately to get external peer review by an accrediting entity or a domestic one to ultimately show that they meet the standards. So very, very important. In the United States, as I mentioned, there are many accrediting bodies or accreditors, ACPE, there is accrediting body for dentistry, nursing, occupational therapy, and so on. These are non-governmental organizations. However, they are approved by the Council for Higher Education or the US Department of Education. At the Lebanese American University, at the School of Pharmacy, we're accredited by the New England Higher Education. That's our accrediting body, and that's how we get our accreditation, because we also have a campus in New York. So that's our accrediting body. So that is important, again, from that perspective. Now, if I ask you, and again, maybe I should get the chat myself, if you're thinking about your domestic accrediting entity, what do you think they should be doing? What would you like this new national accrediting body? What should they be doing in Iraq? Let me see if I can, yeah. What do you think? Please go ahead and type. I do have the chat. I opened it. Any thoughts based on this introduction? If you want to give advice, and I hope when that established that the national accrediting body in Iraq for pharmacy programs really sought input from all the pharmacy schools, and I would assume they did. So any thoughts about this? Well, again, I'll keep looking at the chat, but for the sake of time, I think the key thing, and especially from an external accrediting body, and that is something I strongly believe in, and Mike Rouse, who's in charge of the international accreditation, he and I, we spoke a lot in terms of the importance of balancing the cultural diversity and the national sovereignty. Every country is different. That's why I said accreditation, it's not one size fits all. We have, yes, there are certain standards that we need to maintain across the board. However, there is such cultural differences between different programs, countries, and so on. So it is so important to keep that in mind. And even in Iraq, there might be differences in certain parts of Iraq. So again, that there should be a balance there and so on. Consider the circumstances. Absolutely, especially with COVID, we know that even in the United States and for our school, there has to be some modifications. Even our experiential experience, the accrediting body ACP had to accept that we do certain things differently to meet educational outcomes because, unfortunately, of the pandemic and so on. We also need to keep in mind, and in some countries more than others, that there's new political agendas. There's an ongoing shifting of the policies. Technology is different between countries. And certainly our campuses are becoming more and more multicultural, whether in the United States or I've been to Jordan, I've been to Oman, I've been to Qatar, and there is a diverse group of students and they learn differently. Their expectations are different. So we need to keep a lot of those in mind when we want to maintain quality. The accrediting standards also should keep those in mind, whether they're internal or external, very important. As an accrediting body, you need to embrace and stay ahead of rapid changes in higher education and in the profession. For us as healthcare providers and our students, we need to make sure that these standards are very much aligned with the current practice, but also the future practice. So ultimately that our learning educational outcomes will ultimately help the students meet those competencies, the skill, the knowledge, and yes, the attitude, so that they can function successfully based on, again, the situation that they are in. The ensure quality, ensure competence, resource availability. We're all struggling with resources and we're trying to do the best we can. We're having our self-study in November, and we actually, for the finance aspect, we put compliant with monitoring because, again, of the financial situation in Lebanon. So we have to be realistic. We do the best we can based on the resources we have, but again, we need to continue to monitor and make sure to try to improve and so on. Thank you. There's a question about the standards and how much they are updated. In general, it used to be in the United States every 6 years. Now it's every 6 to 8 years. The last standards were in 2016, and now ACPE is actually asking all the stakeholders. I was at the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy meeting in July in Texas, and they put the call out for all the schools to go on the website for ACPE and to try to provide input for the new standards. And that process is going to take almost 3 years. So the new standards that will come out, they will be standards 2025, which make them almost 2016 to 2025, almost 9 years. So in general, 6 to 8 years, and then you will have the new standards. Thank you for your question.
Dr. Nassar, sorry to interrupt. Just before we move, we have another question on that, on this slide. From Dr. Khalid, please, any examples on the first point in what that has to do with the science? I think he's asking about the balance of cultural diversity.
Any examples on the first point? What has to do with science? Well, it has a lot to do with science in a sense, because again, if you don't, I mean, I teach a course in cultural competency for healthcare professionals. You have to really be adaptive in a sense, the way you teach to patients with cognitive, certain cognitive disabilities, ADHD, they have ADHD, there are patients with mental issues, depression, and so on, physical issues, important language issue, that is important. So when we talk about cultural diversity, there is so much that can impact the learning. In the United States, we have a large group from Asia, from Vietnam, and so on. English is not their first language, and so on. So there's so many cultural issues. Religion can play a role. So again, the cultural diversity issues and so on within a certain country. For example, ACPE, when they go to Saudi Arabia, they recognize that in the schools where they have women, they cannot really meet face to face, and usually the women are in another room and so on. So how do you do that? How do you put the standards if you're doing international certification based on the fact conservatism and modesty and so on. So again, accrediting bodies need to be cognizant of the diversity of the population and so on. You're absolutely correct. It's not about science, but it's about recognizing the differences in terms of the students, population, and the culture of the country and so on. Does that answer the question, Dr. Khalid? I hope so. Okay, so moving on with this, again, straying ahead of rapid changes, quality, competence, and resources to meet the mission. And the focus should be on the mission and making sure that ultimately maintaining quality, ultimately improving student outcomes and so on is really key for all entities. And even when ACP comes here, it's all about improving quality. So that has to be the key thing in terms of what they do when they assess any programs in Iraq or in Saudi Arabia or whatever. Again, it goes back to bullet number one. Keep in mind that local standards may not align well with the international focus. So the key thing is, when you have an external entity, they need to understand what is unique, what is specific about your own situation in Iraq, in Baghdad, as compared to maybe other parts of Iraq and so on. So that, again, the alignment might not be there in some situation, which is fine. So it doesn't mean that all aspects of the program has to be aligned with international, and there has to be some sensitivity with that. And again, with anything that is done, and as I mentioned, hopefully with your national body, that they did get input from all the stakeholders. And I just mentioned, based on the question that I was asked, that ACPE standards 2025, almost 3 years, they're going to be getting input, focus groups, and I believe there is another buddy meeting for the different pharmacy school in October to again provide input about what the standards for 2025 should look like. Very, very important. Moving on in terms of what is quality in higher education, I think this is the key word: accountability. And it's accountability for all stakeholders. And that includes staff, that includes faculty and on an individual level, and that includes students, alumni, preceptors, everybody that is involved in that program. They have to be accountable. They have to understand the process of assessment that is happening, the standards, the learning outcomes, and everybody feeds into that to maintain the quality. If one part is not doing their part, unfortunately, that's not going to happen, and it's going to be really problematic in terms of maintaining a quality program and so on. So accountability is so key. Again, account for differences in instructional design, pedagogy differences. Teaching is an art, and different schools do it differently. Some use case-based learning, some use a flipped classroom, some use modules, some use integrated modules. So there's so many different ways of doing this. And we have to account for that when we do accreditation, when we look at quality and so on, because there is nothing wrong with the instructional methodologies being different. Ultimately, what you want to assess is that they're meeting the learning outcomes and the standards. So the instructional methodology, it can vary, the pedagogy can vary, but ultimately you want to meet the same educational outcomes. At Creighton University, where I taught before, we were the first pharmacy school in 2001 to establish a Doctor of Pharmacy degree in addition to our campus pathway, a distance pathway. And we had 75 students when we first started in like 26 states in the United States. And again, we looked at, well, we have two different cohorts, one program. How can we maintain quality and meet the same standards and quality for both programs and learning outcomes. And we established what we called performance and learning parity, so that whatever we do in the campus and the distance, we find ways to make sure we meet the same learning outcomes, even though the instructional methodology might be different. And we'll talk about distance education in a minute. No conflict of interest. Again, if you have a conflict of interest and you go to another university to assess them, you shouldn't be there. 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I was on the accrediting team that assessed the Lebanese International University. And at that time, I was in the United States. And then I came here, and usually the ACPE will come 2 years later. So I got a call to if I wanted to do the visit for the Lebanese International for their 2-year assessment. And I said, well, I was there, now I'm in Lebanon, as long as the dean there feels comfortable, and he's a good colleague, Dr. Mohammed Rahal, some of you maybe know him. And I called him and I said, this is a deal, do you have any issue? He did not. Then when the board for ACPE met, they felt since I'm a dean at another pharmacy school in Lebanon, they did not feel comfortable. So I was asked to withdraw from the team. So again, it is so critical if there is any issue with conflict of interest, whether, and that's goes for you at the University of Baghdad, because we're given the opportunity also, if we identify any of the visiting team members where there could be a conflict of interest, we could ask ACP to say, we would like this individual to be removed from the team. So that is so critical. And from a moral, ethical perspective, very important. As you know, many of us had to go distance. We were fortunate at Creighton because we were in the business for almost 20 years. So we had a seamless kind of process of moving distance because we've done it with our distance pathway for almost 20 years. However, it is so critical. And now that many people are doing hybrid and so on, you cannot really maintain quality by saying we continue to do business as usual, as if our students are on campus. You have to establish specific quality indicators for both conventional and the distance program. Specific assessment for how learners learn with each other, how the learners interact with the interface, whatever your learning management system, how they interact with the content that you put online, and how they interact with, how they interact with the instructor, and how they interact with the technology that they are using. Very critical, very important, especially now, again, with COVID, and many schools are giving faculty the option of teaching at a distance, again, to maintain quality and meet standards, whatever those standards are. We need to make sure what we're doing with our distance students, that it is meeting the educational outcomes and the learning outcomes, as we said. Again, important to clearly define what is considered quality, and that starts with the standards from the accrediting body internally, but then the learning outcomes comes from the university, the school itself, and those are aligned, and that's what you're assessing to make sure your learning outcomes on a yearly basis, on a 2-year basis, 3, when the students graduate, that they are meeting the standards. Very, very important. Again, many people are hesitant to do assessment. We always say assessment is not punitive, it is for development purposes. We all pharmacists, or we teach in pharmacy school. When we talk about patient safety, when we talk about medication errors, we say that medication errors are a system error. It's not an individual error that we need to punish that individual. We need to change the system so that, and modify it and make it better and put checks and balances so the same error does not happen again. The same thing with, again, assessment and quality assurance and so on, that it's for development purposes, not punitive. And hopefully that will establish a culture of assessment, and everybody, faculty, staff, and students are willing to be part of the process. And when I talk about the students, one of the major aspects of assessment from the student perspective is their course evaluation. It's the focus group we do with them, or the exit survey when they finish their program. We want them to really understand the importance of their evaluation and that it counts. So we want constructive criticism, and that takes a lot of effort. We want the students not to be emotional in terms of their evaluation, because that doesn't help. It doesn't really give us, they're just ranting. We want them to, we want to train them also to give constructive criticism, or whether it's the faculty, whether it's the program, or any aspects of the program. We want them to be able to help us from that perspective. And when we talk about culture of assessment, that means we need to give them the time to really be able to do it. So it cannot be during final exams. They're all stressed and tired and so on. And then we tell them finish assessment for 8 courses. That should not happen. So it should be a very specific time allocated so that they are part of the process and they provide constructive input. Key thing is you need to trust in the peer review process, whether it's internally or externally. At LAU, we're establishing a peer review for all the courses, where we're going to bring in a faculty member from the education department to sit in the classroom, observe what happens, and then we'll sit with the faculty member and give them some insights about how they feel things can be changed, modified. And they're also going to meet with a focus group of students so that they provide, again, it's for development purposes, not punitive. And that's the key thing to emphasize with all of that. So hopefully that helps. In terms of, again, the curriculum, when we talk about designing and delivering a curriculum, we need to be able to address the knowledge, the skills, and the attitude. Sadly enough, in the United States, guilty as charged, I believe here at LAU, even though I'm trying to change things, we always emphasize the knowledge and the skills. But in terms of the student behavior, we don't really assess that, and we don't really make them accountable for their professionalism to the best we can, to characterize what we want them in terms of values, morals, behaviors that they should exhibit as pharmacy students. So the cognitive domain, we're always assessing it, and critical thinking and all that stuff. We need to assess the affective domain as much. Ultimately, these are professionals, and when they go out, regardless of the knowledge and the skills that they have, if they don't conduct themselves with the right attitude, with professionalism, and exhibit what a professional is, and being punctual and being respectful and caring and so on, then absolutely. So if I could stress, as you building your curriculum to really meet these national standards, I do hope the attitude, the affective domain is as important, as critical to assess as part of the quality assurance. Encourage and reward innovations. We need to encourage our faculty to think out of the box. Again, disruptive innovation, very important, and reward them. And yes, you know, we mentioned some of the awards with AACP. God willing, there's internal awards for these faculty that really try to assess what they're doing, innovate and improve on the learning for the students, and show the evidence for it, and show that it meets learning outcomes. Absolutely reward them for that. Ensure, again, accountability at the level of the individual. Vertical and horizontal integration, very important. In my old school, we use a concept called introduce, reinforce, and demonstrate. And we have the demonstrate as a small d in different courses, but then we have the demonstrate as a big D with capstone exams that combine many skills for the students to show that they can demonstrate the knowledge, the skills, and the attitude that is required. The course syllabus is so critical in terms of doing that. At LAU, when I came, interesting enough, they have an introduce, reinforce, and apply. So IRA, and I love that. Whether it's demonstrate or apply, It's a higher level of thinking, a Bloom's taxonomy. You want them to demonstrate, you want them to apply. So you're always introducing concepts, but reinforcing them vertically and horizontally. Communication skills, critical thinking, medication therapy management, patient safety, all the things that we try to integrate in our curriculum, and again, reintroduce, reinforce, and demonstrate, and so on. Identify and caters for potential new job opportunities. If I ask you what are key potential job opportunities in Iraq, I hope you know, so that again, your curriculum is catering for that, and your learning outcomes are catering for that. I mentioned veterinary pharmacy. Informatics is a major one. I'm hoping to introduce radio pharmacy, because I think pharmacists should be in charge of radio pharmacy and producing these radio pharmaceuticals and for testing and other things. So again, how can you really be disruptive and innovative, making your curriculum and so on? Integrate assessment throughout. Again, very important. Course evaluation play a major role, and others. Use standardized and comparative for comparative reasons. I hope, and I apologize, I don't know how many pharmacy schools in Iraq, but it would be great that all are looking at evaluations that are comparable, so that they assess and compare each other, and how can we improve. Competition sometimes is healthy, and if there is standardized processes across the universities in Iraq, the School of Pharmacy, absolutely. In the United States, the students take the NAPLEX, and every year everybody's waiting to see the pass rate, because it's the same exam across 140 plus schools, and everybody want to show that our passing rate is 96% or whatever. And God forbid, sadly, in some schools now we're seeing 80% and 76%, sadly, because about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we had only 81 schools. Now we have 144 schools in the United States. So very important. I don't know if you're familiar with curricular hoarding. We're guilty very much with that in pharmacy. Yes, there is so many major changes in science, in technology, in practice, clinical practice, and other aspects of pharmacy practice. And sadly, what do? We keep dumping and dumping into the curriculum, and we don't take anything out. And many times there's stuff that is not relevant. I asked at LAU that for all the lab activities that we do in the lab, an assessment whether it is directly meeting a learning outcome. If it is not directly meeting a learning outcome, it shouldn't be as part of our curriculum. So very important to assess your curriculum, so that there is not hoarding of all the types of knowledge that has been around from God knows when till now. Original discovery is critical, important. Basic science is important. I'm a basic scientist myself, but I also believe in relevance, and how can we make the basic sciences relevant. I also believe that clinical faculty should be bi-directional. They need to show the importance of original discovery and the science in terms of helping them make these clinical decisions and so on. So it goes both ways. But again, we need to assess. We had colleagues that are teaching oncology, and they teach it where the students are oncologists rather than entry-level pharmacy students. So again, we really need to be cognizant of how much we teach, what we teach, to what extent, what is relevant, and so on. Very critical, very important. So finally, in terms of the curriculum, we need to prepare graduates for the current and future practice. I mentioned that. We need to do it in an efficient way, cost-effective way. It needs to be streamlined. We talk about vertical and horizontal again, and that depends on curriculum mapping. I mentioned the IRD model to introduce, reinforce, and demonstrate, a beautiful model to help you map your curriculum so it is streamlined, where you introduce certain topics, where you reinforce them, and then how do you make the students demonstrate, and so on. I'm not going to go through these 15 elements. The American Association of University Professors, you could read through those. A lot of these things, we already discussed them. Key, again, when we do assessment, we want the faculty to own it. It should be faculty driven, absolutely very important. Certainly administration should be encouraging it and should be supporting it, and so on. So very important. We talked about the systemic, setting students' learning outcomes, very important. Assessment of co-curricular activities. What we do in the classroom is very important. At LAU, we have an amazing co-curricular program, and the students get exposed to many service activities. We just had an unbelievable program for celebrating of Pharmacist Day. And for me, that was really as important as learning therapeutics, as learning medicinal chemistry or pharmacology and so on. Such wealth of information from 5 colleagues in different aspects of pharmacy. And for me, those co-curricular activities are important, and they need to be as much part of the assessment process and how they meet learning outcomes as what we do in terms of our curriculum. Do informational forums. I ask that the curriculum committee and the assessment committee meet every semester and do a presentation for the whole school about the assessment that happened in the fall, that happened in the spring, and we're going to do a retreat in this summer to really capture everything. Very, very important, and so on. So I'll move on. This is something you could go through, but everything that I discussed, this is an example from Creighton in terms of our curriculum, the educational outcomes, the learning objectives, and the assessments. And all the assessments are written here, and they're based on, again, course evaluation, experiential experience evaluation, and where they belong in this first year, second year. So, and then how the assessment committee looks at this, assess it. Are we meeting the learning objectives? Are we meeting the educational outcomes? If not, what do we need to modify? Then how do we change those objectives? How do we change the educational outcomes? How they feed back into what should be our learning outcomes and education, and then start the process again and modify the assessments so that now we are meeting the learning objective. So it's a circular process. It's a continuous process. You're assessing, having somebody with expertise in statistics and analysis is so critical. They're God-given fortune, for any school. So you need somebody that helps with assessment of a lot of these quantitative and qualitative data that are produced. Real quick, as I mentioned, we had a distance pathway. I'm very great opponent of distance education. The key thing with any program, but certainly with a distance, you need to maintain the integrity. We have published several papers about distance education and how to maintain integrity. Again, I mentioned the learning and performance parity and how do you maintain those. Very, very important. You cannot just move to do stuff at a distance without training the faculty, without making sure they know how to meet educational outcomes and so on. How do you assess your admissions process? How do you assess your Office of Academic and Student Affairs, the services that you provide? It's almost establishing a brand new program. So you really need to put your distance hat on to try to ensure the same quality exists when you offer your program at a distance. Even a course, one course, you have to make sure you do that. And of course, the quality of experiential experience and all the policies and procedures should be in line with the fact this is at a distance pathway. So why do we do quality assurance in higher education? It makes very common sense. Accountability. Again, everybody's accountable. Individuals, faculty, staff, students, alumni, employer, preceptors. So important to maintain the quality of what the preceptors are doing when the students go on their rotations to make sure that they are meeting the learning outcomes. Whether you have a practice department, pharmaceutical science, social administrative, all of them, whatever their outcomes for the courses, that needs to be assessed, and that is the accountability that should be part of what they do. The same thing with school offices, whether it's faculty development, whether it's office of academic and student affairs, whether it's the experiential experience office, all of it. Any university office, especially those centralized offices, again, they should be accountable to whatever quality assurance you have established to maintain the quality of your program. Why we do it? We are accountable to our stakeholders, the accrediting body. You're going to be accountable now to your national accrediting body. The learners, our students, the patients, their parents, actually. I forgot to mention that, because parents are becoming more and more scrutinizing, especially with the high cost of higher education and professional schools. Very important. We're accountable to society. They're questioning the value of what we do. So we need to show that our students graduate, they have jobs, they have the skills that is needed, they can compete in the market, and so on. Absolutely, that all depends on quality assurance. And many of you maybe have heard interprofessional. I speak in terms of intra-professional. Dr. Kauthar, I apologize. I see we're past. Is this 1 hour or how long?
Supposedly, but yeah, you can go on, Dr. Nassar. I think everyone is really enjoying and benefiting from your presentation.
Thank you. And my apologies if I'm going over time, but I do get carried away sometimes, and I get very much excited about this. So my apologies, but if you have to leave, please feel free. But I'll move on. And if Dr. Kauthar, let me know if I need to stop like in 5 minutes, and I'll try to wrap things up quickly. So real quick, and we're getting close. What I would love for all of us to keep in mind this term, intra-professional. And for me, intra-professional is how we in pharmacy work with and for each other. And I will repeat that. We work with and for each other. A lot of times we're worried about everybody else, but we don't really care about how we work with and for each other. How the basic scientists work with the clinical faculty, with the social administrative, how we work with our students, how we work with our staff. Do we show respect? Are we really working as a team? Are we really stressed out every day that we lash out or cause kind of conflicts? And how do we address conflicts? So I could go on and on in terms of the intra-professional as part of quality assurance. I would say we cannot really venture out and work with anybody unless we clean our own house. So working with our team members, working with and for each other is so critical for us to be a primed machine that is able to maintain quality. If we don't do that, trust me, none of the other stuff will work. And if there is conflict between faculty and staff, so as much as possible within any quality assurance, there has to be an effort to ensure a certain intra-professional sensitivity. We're sensitized to each other, what each one of us do, how they contribute. We value what they do, we value what they contribute, we work collaboratively together in coordination with each other. So critical, so important. I could go on and on with that. So please keep that in mind. So why, again, we do it? We want to address standards for practice. Again, ultimately, we want our students to meet those standards and be able to compete. We want to build the character of our students. Again, the attitude is so critical. It's not only about knowledge. It's not only about the skills. We need them to exhibit the values and the characteristics so that they really advance society better, socially, economically, politically. I have to be frank with you, in Lebanon, the country, no doubt about it, sadly, as in many other countries, socially, economically, politically, and so on. So the idea for us in the health sciences, not to train our students, to leave all these divisions behind and concentrate on what does it mean to be a pharmacist? What does it mean to be part of the profession of the pharmacy? or إنه الانتماء تاعك يكون للمهنة مش لأي شغلة تانية especially politics and so on. or أنا والله مشان أنا من بيروت I look differently على واحد من جبيل أو من الجنوب or من العراق إنه بغداد من الموصل بصرة and so on. So the attitude is so critical, and we want these kids to graduate with the right attitude to function in society and exhibiting all the characteristics of being a professional as much as having the knowledge and the skills. Accountability, I cannot overemphasize that. Independence is important. Give students opportunities, choices, and a voice. Very important. We have to respect our students, and we have to make them feel comfortable that they can come to us, even question us in the classroom. I always tell my students, you might know something that I have no clue about. And when I'm lecturing, I want you to be comfortable to say that and help inform us, educate us, and so on. So very important that they have a voice and so on. And again, we want our students to help address both the local and the global problems. There is a term that, yes, we need to think globally and have our students meet global competencies, but we also want them to act locally and be able to function within the environment they're in and address the needs of the environment they're in. But again, to also be global citizens, that is important because of the globalization of education and because many students now are going across borders to practice and so on, and they need to be global citizens. And many accrediting bodies, they will assess the program that the students are global citizens. So very important also for us. We want to increase the employability and meet the labor shortages, whether in Iraq, Baghdad, or certain areas, and so on. The same thing in the United States now, there is shortages in rural areas, tremendous shortages, while in many of the cities, there is too many pharmacists, I should say. So again, how can we help with that? Increases trust of the public, accrediting body that we're doing the right things and maintaining quality. And again, the knowledge, the skills, I cannot over and attitude. How do we establish it? It starts with what you give the assessment committee as their charge. I met with the assessment committee chairperson and vice chair, and I told them that in my opinion, overseeing both curricular assessment and programmatic assessment. However, can you still hear me? Hello?
Yes, Dr. Nasir, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just saw and noticed that my internet is unstable. So the key thing with this is that in terms of the assessment committee, they should not be the ones that are collecting all the data. They shouldn't be the ones that are analyzing all the data. They are in support of all the different entities, departments, offices, curriculum committee, and others to help them do the assessment right. But the accountability should be on the curriculum committee. The accountability should be on the faculty member teaching the course, on the department chairperson, on the Office of Experiential Experience. If they all cannot put indicators of quality in terms of what they do and assess them and follow them and show trends that they're doing the right things year in, year out, then obviously they're not comfortable doing their job. So again, the charge of the assessment committee is so critical. If you put the charge for the assessment committee to do all of this, it is impossible. It is so hard, and people will end up giving up because it's overwhelming. So there has to be accountability, again, on the different offices. There have to be buy-in. So the assessment committee should meet with them, talk to them about, again, support them and so on, help them with the data analysis and so on, but ultimately they need to really establish their quality indicators for what they do and provide an executive summary in terms of how they meet that. I mentioned intra-professional sensitivity, again, individual accountability, organizational structure and support for assessment. You need that. You have to have a staff member to support and help and so on. Positive and effective leadership, identifying the needs of all learners. That's where diversity is important. Understanding the diversity of the student population. Some students might be hard of hearing, some might have other issues. Again, you need to really assess that. Empowering the faculty and staff, identify the process involved, and define assessment and continuous improvement strategy, and data and information to inform evidence. Everything should be based on evidence, both qualitative and quantitative. As a basic scientist, I always did my research with toxicology and collecting numbers and assessing the treatment compared to the control and so on. But as became more and more involved with scholarship of teaching and learning, the qualitative is so important. And when we do mixed qualitative, quantitative analyses of what we do, there is so much strength in that. So I would encourage you to combine those to make sure, again, that it is done right. This is kind of a summary what I mentioned earlier. So when we talk to all your stakeholders, it is so critical that they're accountable. So whatever that office, academic student affairs, the curriculum committee, the experiential office, they need to put their quality indicators. They need to establish their desired outcomes in terms of what indicators they want to look at and so on. Then they need to tell us what is the data to support that they are achieving, these outcomes and so on. And that's where the assessment committee comes in, but they need to be able to do that because that's their job. That's what they do day in and day out. Then they need to show what is the change that happened from the previous year, that the indicators declined, they remained the same, or they improved. Depending on that, they actually rate themselves, whether fair, good, very good, excellent. And that's where you provide incentive for different offices because they're lending themselves to improve the quality of your program. Absolutely, they should be rewarded. And ultimately, what is the action plan for the next 3 months or the next 6 months or the year? Depending on different offices, they might be reporting every 3 months, every 6 months, every year, but there has to be an action plan and they have to be accountable for it. And ultimately, they have to write an executive summary summarizing this process so that the assessment committee look at their report, look at reports from other offices and committees. And that's again where the assessment committee will oversee the programmatic and curricular assessment because they see everything, because all these reports will come back to them with the executive summary, and they are able now to really help improve the process for the curriculum. So with that, I think I'm going to rush through the next few slides. Sorry about that. I put here the standards that are from the accreditation body in the United States. I hope you can do the same thing for your national body, but it's divided into 3 sections. The educational outcomes, there are these 4 standards under them. Then there's standards to promote achievement of the educational outcomes. A lot of that is the infrastructure, students, preceptors, how we do our pre-advanced pharmacy practice experience. Interprofessional education is huge. So everything is assessed so that ultimately they feed into section 1. But the last section is the assessment. Assessment of section 1, are we meeting all these educational outcomes with all the courses and the students being able to meet practice for care and so on? And are all these processes in place to ultimately meet the educational outcomes? So the ones that I highlighted in yellow believe it or not, are actually part of the accreditation standards for the schools of medicine in Iraq. I did find the document online, but again, I apologize. So at least that document that was established for the medical schools in Iraq, they do address educational outcomes, college vision, the school vision, mission and goals, the governance that exists, how the students are involved, how the faculty are involved, how the dean interacts with the president, the provost, all of that governance and so on, and the student services, admissions. So all of these were mentioned as part of the standards. Some of the other stuff maybe are mentioned within some of these, but at least in terms of the headlines or the major headings, I should say, these are the ones that part of that document. So hopefully, again, when you get your standards from your national entity, that at least you're addressing as many of these educational outcomes that you establish for your curriculum, and ultimately all the other processes that contribute to meeting the educational outcomes. I kind of went through all of this. It's what we did at Creighton. I'm going to skip through that for the sake of time. Oops, sorry about that. I'm going to skip through that, but we discussed the process and the map. This is kind of an example of, again, the assessment measures, student evaluation of didactic course. We do that every semester. You do it at the end of the course evaluation. The instructor of record is the one responsible, and they need to write a summary of what happened in the course. And then who does the data analysis, the assessment committee and the curriculum committee. So it goes with everything that is done in terms of the assessment, qualitative, quantitative, and again, how long, when is it done, by whom it is done, collected, who's assessing it, and the reporting that happens. And that should happen across the board throughout the curriculum. And that kind of explains the whole process in terms of, again, the continuous quality improvement based on the philosophy for the curriculum. So in summary, and I apologize for taking too much time, if I ask you, and again, I'm going to kind of maybe challenge you here, if you bear with me, what are the implications for you at the University of Baghdad? What do you think? And I'm going to scroll now. I do see that there is any comments, or please unmute yourself if you're able. What are the implications? What are some key words that stuck in your mind? If I did at least a decent job, what do you feel is some take-home messages for you? Or what am I missing? Or what is it that I should have done better based on your needs and so on? Thoughts, comments?
I think, Dr. Nasser, the most important thing is the establishment of quality assurance culture. That's one important thing. And how the reflection and the continuous assessment is important toward the accreditation process. It's not just like a tick, and this is done, this needs to be done. It's the continuity of the quality of the program.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Kauthar. This is not a checklist that check. Absolutely. Again, it's systemic. It's not done for the purpose of accreditation. It is done for your own satisfaction, for your own commitment to quality education. Absolutely. Thank you. Other comments, thoughts?
I see we have raised hand. دكتورة سليمة, can the participant, دكتورة سليمة, ممكن يفتحون المايكات لو حضرتش تفتحيها؟
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام, Dr. Ali.
Welcome, Dr. Nasser. Thank you so much for this informative presentation. We are happy to have you with us.
Allah يخليك, تسلم.
Dr. Nasser, regarding to the quality assurance and evaluation, so do you recommend, or do you think, like starting to have the annual assessment? We are like getting in the University of Baghdad, we have this step's already done, the assessment, as I know Dr. Carter, member of the committee. Do you think we need to have our own, like we already have the national criteria for the assessment? Do you think we need also, when we need to follow the international ones, the ACPE, do you think the ACPE ones will be like advanced step after we reach certain stage, or do we need to think this like earlier? So do you think we have to have our own national ones first done when we are ready, so we can move to the next step? Do you have any experience, like from your background in the US region or the Lebanese universities? Thank you.
Sure. You know, I'm an advocate, and again, since maybe 95, to have internal accreditation and potentially regional accreditation for countries that are in a certain region and they are similar in terms of the education process, recognizing again, not one size fits all. So to really say we need to go after the ACPE accreditation, absolutely not. No, because if you have your own national accreditation, and as I mentioned earlier, if this was done in collaboration with the stakeholders in Iraq, all the stakeholders, God willing, النتيجة تاعته is so specific للطالب اللي موجود بالعراق. It is so specific, hopefully, for the job market in Iraq. So the key thing is you always want to meet the standards based on what you have internally. If you're seeking international accreditation, absolutely, you have to look at what ACPE does, or what the Canadian do, or the Australians, as some of our colleagues in different parts of the Arab world, you know, like in Qatar University, they have the Canadians and so on. So I think, again, I would not really worry about the international. Now, there's nothing wrong to look at the international. Absolutely, believe it or not, if you read the medical schools in Iraq, it's the same one that the Federation of Medical Schools in the United States have. If that's what they elected to do, that's their choice. Hopefully, those standards do meet the needs of the Iraqi student, of the Iraqi medical market. So again, I would not venture internationally. If there is national, God willing, it meets the needs of Iraq. It is culturally sensitive. It addresses the cultural needs of the student in Iraq, the learning kind of pedagogy, the instruct. Believe it or not, you know, we have students from the Arab world that come to the United States, and it takes them a while to adjust because the students come in and they're not as much used to the interaction, that the faculty might even stop and say, you know, I don't know the answer. And some of them even is like, So there's cultural differences whether students go there or come here. So what I'm trying to say is, if I understood your question correctly, I would go with what is established in Iraq. God willing, it was done thoughtfully, systemically, in coordination, collaboration with colleagues across Iraq, that it is representative of what should be done to establish quality in Iraq. Be proud of it, be committed to it, and God willing, it might be even better than what is done internationally. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Dr. Nasser. And I think we have a few comments in the chat. If you can
I'll go back.
make a comment or look at them. And these are in response to like, what do you think question that you
do a quality check on pharmacy to advise. Dr. Dalal, Dr. Dalal, how are you? Do a quality, could you please state your question? I'm not really clear. Do a quality check on pharmacy programs to advise, commend, and recommend. I'm not getting it.
I think that was a question earlier.
Oh, yeah, I'm not clear about that. What is being asked? Please, any examples on the first point? Okay,
That's been answered.
I don't see anything.
The last three things. We have a comment from Dr. Dalal, disruptive innovation. I like this.
I mean, she knows, I think, about this. I'm a disruptor. I've been a disruptor since I came to Lebanon, and I love it. And I believe the culture of being disruptive innovation is being instilled in the faculty and even the staff. And again, it's not, in business, and I should qualify this, when there's disruptive innovation in business, sadly, it is to destroy the competition. In academia, when we talk about disruptive innovation, it's not about destroying anybody. It's about really thinking about outside the box so that we're creative, innovative, and really making sure that we move forward with a new vision, a new insight, and so on. Again, very, very critical, very important. Education.
The other comment you have from Dr. Abedi.
I'm sorry?
Education is a training to get a job. That's what Dr. Aloma commented.
Sadly, that might be the case for quite a few of our students. I hope we can, again, it goes back to what I mentioned about the knowledge, the skills, and the attitude. If we embed in our students that our profession is a sacred profession, our profession adds value to society, it adds value to our patients and so on. When I hear that pharmacists help physicians, we don't help physicians. We are on equal footing with physicians, and we impact patient care the same way that physicians might impact patient care, and even more in different situations. So the idea in terms of is pharmacy a profession or is it an auxiliary service? We need to get that out of the mind of our students so that they have pride in their profession. Our professional organizations, our syndicate in Lebanon, it's the Order of Pharmacy. We want them to be committed to the profession, not to politics, not to serving certain interests. We want them to serve the profession. So the more and more, God willing, again, we emphasize the attitude, emphasize the affective domain. And we are role models also in doing so. Hopefully our students start thinking this is going to be a vocation for me, this is going to be a calling for me rather than just a job. And I know it's not easy. I know it's tough. I know our pharmacists in this part of the world, they're not as appreciated, even though, again, you hear amazing stories of what pharmacists are doing in different communities. We had examples of those, 5 of them, on Friday when we celebrated Pharmacist Day. So we just need to also engage the media, advocate for our profession, showcase really what we do on TV. I just came back from Spain from the FIB meeting. The syndicate of pharmacists in Spain, they identified all the social media outlets and how people consume news and so on. And they targeted those social medias with messages about what pharmacists do, what pharmacists did during COVID and so on. I think every country, and I even said that in the United States, we need Hollywood to produce a movie about pharmacists, and whether it's a love story or whatever, but the bottom line is to show what pharmacists really do. We see a lot of shows about doctors and nurses. It's like we need to hit the media in every way to show what pharmacists do, and God willing, in Iraq, in Egypt, in Lebanon, to really make sure the public understand how much we impact patient care positively and the image of pharmacy as adding value, as committed to the health of society and so on. Absolutely, and hopefully we don't talk anymore about this is only a job. It's going to be the job for some people, absolutely, in the United States, because they get paid relatively good. So they look at it in terms of, I just need the money. So we do have that, but God will.
And I think, yeah, the last comment we have is large number of students reduces the possibility of applying the quality conditions.
That's a tough one. Absolutely. I'm not sure in Iraq if there is a body, whether it's the accrediting body or the professional organization, where they can limit the number of pharmacy schools that open, where they look at what are the job opportunities and they limit that. In the United States, sadly enough, the ACPE, they said we cannot do that legally. It's against, free competition and this and that. So again, we went from 80 schools to 144 schools, and you're absolutely correct. For several years now, difficulty in job opportunities, difficulty in finding good quality students, which affect, quality in certain programs. Some programs are closing in the United States. So I think you do need the leadership that really advocate for quality across, that yes, we could potentially put a limit to the number of schools, the number of students in certain programs. I know in Egypt, they have programs with 1,000 students. Again, I've taught classes as large as 125. Yes, active learning and certain methodology can help, but ultimately you're right. You're absolutely right. Quality can be compromised because the large number of classes, the graduates and the quality of the graduates competing and admitting students that maybe in 10 years ago would not be admitted. So that is something, sadly, yes, that need to be looked at collectively, but pharmacy schools and the professional organization, Ministry of Education, and hopefully find a balance somewhere.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Nasser. We can't thank you enough for this very informative presentation. We couldn't hope for more. شكرا كثير لحضرتك. شكرا لعمادة كلية الصيدلة على دعمها لهذه النشاطات. العميد الدكتور سرمد، وحدة التعليم المستمر دكتورة زهراء، والمتميزين دائما في وحدة ابن سينا دكتورة سليمة وست وفاء اللي ويانا دائما في كل النشاطات الإلكترونية. شكرا لجميع حضورنا. شكرا مرة أخرى لك دكتور ناصر، وإحنا عندنا لقاء آخر ويا حضرتك في نوفمبر
إن شاء الله.
Yep, for curriculum delivery methods. فإن شاء الله we'll see you again in November. Thank you very much.
شكرا لك دكتورة كوثر. I just commend you for all what you do. يعني ما شاء الله. I keep track of all the faculty development that you do. I've learned from some of them. So يعطيك العافية. Great job. Keep up the great work. وألف شكر لك وللحضور.
شكرا لحضرتك. شكرا للجميع.
شكرا لك. يلا يعطيك العافية.
الله يعافيك. شكرا.